Built in less than a year for a bargain basement price and the expectation it could make Atlanta a major league city, Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium became a donut-shaped, multi-purposed civic achievement.
I always said that Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium was the best stadium built for the money in the 60s.
You've given us the finest facility to play baseball in that exists in the major leagues today.
51 weeks after the groundbreaking, on sod laid just the night before, the Milwaukee Braves played the Detroit Tigers in an exhibition game in the stadium's maiden event.
Just proved to me that we were right. Atlanta is a big league city.
Nixon goes as far as he can go. He caught the ball.
It is best known for its 3 decades as host to Braves baseball, the site of the come-from-behind pennant clincher in 1992, the World Series victory in 1995, and in 1974 for baseball history when Hank Aaron hit number 715 off a Dodgers pitcher named Al Downing. But the old stadium saw much more than a few moments of fleeting glory and was much more than a baseball park.
I want you to really show them that they're loved when we bring them out here in Atlanta.
It entered the history books just 4 months after it first opened, when a pop group called the Beatles showed up, met with the mayor,
and the song is called I Feel Fine,
and tried to pierce the scream-soaked air with a concert at second base.
And as soon as they opened up with the first note, the entire stadium just went up. Everybody stood up and just screamed the entire time.
The stadium went on to host an annual jazz festival and a rare concert by Barbra Streisand, and plenty of rock and roll shows. The biggest crowd ever at the stadium was in 1974, when more than 61,000 people showed up for the Allman Brothers Band.
They got away from us a little bit in the dressing room and put on probably the worst concert they've ever put on. They had to carry Greg up onto the stage. He couldn't walk.
And in between was the occasional mass baptism and Billy Graham revival. But although it was built as a multi-purpose stadium, its primary purpose was sports. When Atlanta had a pro soccer team, it played there. The stadium hosted 20 years worth of Peach Bowls, 26 years worth of Atlanta Falcons football.
No champs! No champs! No champs!
In 1987, when NFL players went on strike, professional linebackers and tackles formed picket lines outside Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. And when motocross came to Atlanta, the bikes hit the dirt there, much to the chagrin of the grounds crews that had to clean it all up for baseball.
The 1-2. Fly ball left. Murphy's going to have to hurry.
And though it was built for more than baseball, that became its claim to fame. In its first year, Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium was the site of the final season for the minor league Atlanta Crackers, who would leave town forever to make way for the Braves the following year.
Warner battles sun and wind. He's in all sorts of trouble. Forget it.
The Braves, which left Milwaukee for the promise of a new market and what was then a state-of-the-art ballpark, played more than 2,500 games here. It was the house that Ted ruled, and most of Turner's teams were middling at best. Perhaps the ultimate in futility came in a game that started July 4th, 1985, when Braves pitcher Rick Camp hit a home run at 3:30 in the morning in the 18th inning. The home team went on to lose 1 inning later.
Hit high into the air, right side.
For years, it was derided as a subpar venue for a mediocre baseball team. But the Braves became champs, and the stadium became a fashionable destination.
It's a good ballpark now. It is a crime to tear it down.
Donut-shaped and built with few frills, Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium won't be remembered for its good looks or its style, but rather for what happened inside for 32 years, baseball and much more. Doug Richards, Eyewitness News, Prime Time.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, let's get this show on the road, shall we? How are you, everybody? Welcome back to the proceedings. It's Tim Hanlon, your pal, your doctor of defunct. And, of course, it's Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast devoted to, say it with me, will you, what used to be in professional sports. Nice to see you or hear you or talk to you again after a little 2-week Thanksgiving holiday-esque break. Appreciate you tolerating our absence for the last couple of weeks. Hopefully you enjoyed our archive re-releases featuring the great Pat Boone talking about the ABA Oakland Oaks that he used to own back in the day in the late 60s. And the equally interesting and fun conversation with our pal JP Dellacamera, now still in the midst of calling all of the World Cup action in Qatar. Both episodes from, 4 or 5 years ago, as we kind of got our bearings, shall we say, and a whole lot of great stuff from previous episodes. And all of them are there for you to explore if you just go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, or just add us to your podcast feeds and you'll see all the old episodes. So feel free, he says, to regale yourselves in those or catch up with some of those episodes you just may have missed. Now, this is one not to miss, and our little setup gives you some indication as we go down south to the deep south of Atlanta, Georgia, and we're going to be talking about the stadium that literally put Atlanta on the map when it came to pro sports and all of the glory that supposedly comes with that. Certainly the tax revenues, but back in the 60s in particular, right? The idea of having a pro or a whole bunch of pro sports franchises, at least in the then 4 sort of major leagues, was almost the assumed calling card, frankly, the entry fee, if you will, to being a major league, literally and figuratively, city. And Atlanta was in that situation in the 60s. And along came a little baseball team known as then the Milwaukee Braves, looking for a new home. And Atlanta came a-calling with the promise of a brand new, at the time, stadium called Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. And yeah, the setup, let's talk about the setup before we get into who we're talking to this week. That was a clip from 1996 by Doug Richards, then of WAGA TV down in Atlanta, now still a reporter guy extraordinaire at WXIA TV in Atlanta. I believe that's the NBC station down there. Doug Richards and his crew talking about, I guess, sort of a reminiscence of what was then the beginning of the end of Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. That is the topic du jour, and we are joined by an interesting assemblage of gents who were there during most of the stadium's existence. We're going to call them the ground crew, and they are comprised of, we've got 2 of the 4, plus the author, the As Told To guy. He is the author by the name of Austin Gisriel, and joining him in our conversation this week are 2 of the original and longtime grounds crew guys at Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium with some amazing stories to tell. Lee Frazier joins us this week, as well as David, we call him Fisher. They being 2 of the 4 gents that have told their stories to Austin Gisriel for the book known as Ground Crew Confidential. And it's literally story after story, anecdote after anecdote about the various doings and interestingnesses of the history of Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium, as told to by the guys who were literally in charge of making everything run in that stadium. And Lee and David, joined by author Austin, will join us to talk about some of those great memories of theirs, as well as those by their fellow groundskeepers, Clay Jackson and Chip Moore, who were not on this podcast, but were part of this book as well. And a fun and entertaining read for sure. And the conversation is pretty damn good too. So stay tuned for that. We're going to get into all kinds of nooks and crannies. Yeah, the Braves, but we get into Atlanta Chiefs stuff. We get into some interesting concert memories there. And Ted Turner makes it a couple of appearances. All kinds of stuff and memories of the great, perhaps lamentable, long, but certainly special place in Atlanta, Georgia natives' hearts, the Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium experience. We're going to be talking about that in a few moments' time with the ground crew coming up. It's fun. You're going to love it. And intriguing to say the least. Sponsorship time. Let's talk to you about our pals at oldschoolshirts.com. As we've referenced many times before, one of the great things about oldschoolshirts.com is that you can go onto their site and not only just be stunned by the ever-growing assortment of awesome logos and collections that they have for you there, but you can actually go to the cities part of the menu, and literally most of the major cities in the United States will pop right up. Just go to the Southeast section and click on Atlanta, since we're talking about the major stadium there during the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and a bit of the 90s, the Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. And you will immediately see tons of great shirts from all kinds of aspects of pop culture and radio stations, but also, of course, as we love to lament here, or remember, obsess about, sports teams and leagues and that kind of stuff. Do you remember the Atlanta Legends of the ill-fated Alliance of American Football? Yeah, the shirt for them is there. How about the Atlanta Flames? We've talked about them on numerous occasions. Great shirts there. The Atlanta Chiefs, a soccer team, the wonderful logo there, a shirt in that form. The Atlanta Thrashers, on and on and on. You name the team. There's an Atlanta 1996 Olympics shirt there. And yes, there are even a couple of shirts, different colors and layouts, commemorating Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium as well. All kinds of great stuff for you there from the great city of Atlanta, but also all kinds of other cities and teams and leagues. You name them. Chances are they're probably there at oldschoolshirts.com. Great pricing, quality T-shirts, and the holidays coming up. Buy a whole bunch and amaze and impress your friends with your various geographical knowledges of perhaps where they grew up or where they live now. Promo code for you there, of course. Can't forget that. Good Seats. Good Seats is the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. 10% off everything at this wondrous site that keeps growing by the week. It's oldschoolshirts.com. Thank you, P.F. Wilson and team there, for your sponsorship of the show. We appreciate it. Wonderful and high-quality stuff, to be sure. We won't steer you wrong and prove us right by buying a few items there, giving us a few shekels of referral love, and perhaps delighting your holiday gift recipients this year. All right, let's get into Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium memories, shall we? Let's talk to the ground crew, at least two of them. Here's our conversation we had a few weeks back, obviously before the holiday, with Lee Frazier and David Fisher and the author Austin Gisriel, as we talk about memories of Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium. Please, as always, enjoy. Austin, you're the author of this thing. Maybe you can be the best, describer, I guess, of what this project was, how it came out, how it came to be, and why this focus on a arguably beloved, but also perhaps not much missed Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium.
Yeah, it's one of those stories of somebody knew somebody. Lee had a boss who happens to be my wife's cousin, and Lee can elaborate on this a little bit, and Fish too. They've been kind of collecting and swapping stories from their 5 years, and I know Lee's been writing stuff down, and then they started to get together, and the idea evolved. We need to put this into some kind of book form. So Lee mentioned that to his boss, again, my wife Martha's cousin. His name's Mike McDonald. And he said, well, my cousin is married to this guy who writes baseball books, and maybe you want to get in touch with him. So, Lee and I got in touch with one another. To be honest, I forget who called who first, but it would be 2 years ago this coming December. And we chatted, and, Lee did his due diligence on me and got some of my other books and decided, hey, this is the guy to tell our story. And we started a year ago this past August, set up Zoom calls, and just, I would have some questions, but they often weren't necessary. You could just throw out a name And, off we went for an hour or so. And I guess we had maybe 10 of those kinds of calls. And I tell people, and I told these guys when we started, we're building this wall of stories. We're dry stacking it. So you bring me the stones, bring me lots of stones, and I'll piece them together until we got something that we all like. And that's how it came about.
That pretty well says it. Yep.
Well, all right, let's kind of, for our audience, get a bit of a sense here. We're talking about the stadium, I guess, when it was first originated and built and came into life. It was called Atlanta Stadium, but it quickly became, by the mid 70s, known as Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. Maybe for some background, a little bit of origin story. This is a stadium that kind of began its professional life in 1965, and obviously the years prior to that, and in the attempt mostly to attract a baseball team, and then very quickly thereafter an NFL football franchise and other things that came along with it over time. Give me a sense, Lee and David, AKA Fish, your knowledge and association with this stadium, and in particular, how you came to be part of the grounds crew of such. I'm assuming it wasn't from the very beginning, or perhaps maybe it was.
All right, I'll go first on this because David will have a different take, and it might be a little deeper take. Since I was actually living in North Carolina when they built the stadium, and it was big news even up there because our closest professional teams were the Washington Senators or the Redskins or further up, or to Baltimore, stuff like that. So, but my dad was actually coming down to his company got hired to put the sprinkler system in the upstairs in the offices, the fire protection. So he came down during the week and was there for the construction of the stadium. He would come back to North Carolina on the weekends. But, we didn't think anything about it at the time. And when the job was completed, they offered him a chance to come down and run the office here in Atlanta, this branch of their company. And so this field office. So he accepted. He asked my brother. I'll never forget, my mom and him asked my brother and me if we wanted to move to Atlanta. And boy, we jumped on the chance from being in our little town in North Carolina, big league sports right around the corner and all that. So here we go. And at that time, I had no idea, of course, I'd end up working for the Braves, but became a huge Braves fan overnight immediately. And just 3 years later, late in the 10th grade, got hired as an usher there. And so was an usher for the first 3 quarters of the season. At the end of that season, a lot of the ground crew guys, I didn't know it at that time, but a lot of the ground crew guys left to go back to college, and they were shorthanded. So they would always come up and ask ushers if they wanted to be on the ground crew. 3 of my mates and myself said, yeah, we went down and loved it and ended up coming back to the ground crew from then on. But I always thought it was a funny sidebar. All these stories we have to tell and all these things we've been through as a group, the 4 of us. And the whole thing for me started with my dad coming down here, putting a fire protection system into that stadium. So I used to sit there under the seats in the ground crew room and look at those old sprinkler bells up there that would ring or whatever with his company's name on it and think, I bet my dad had something to do with hanging that thing right there. So it was pretty cool in that respect. And then, of course, just the whole idea of coming down here with that awestruck feeling of coming to a big league park and then going to work for the Braves was just a dream come true. So
you were essentially kind of there from the very beginning then, albeit not necessarily on the ground crew, but you were there in like the first year or two of its
no, actually not. My dad, when this happened, this went on, and I guess the first actual year I didn't start until 71.
Got it.
So, but we moved to Atlanta in like 68. So, but I was too young to work at that point. Of course, at that point. So it was
essentially it's still kind of newish, right? Because the Braves and the Falcons, I think, started in earnest in 66, right? So
correct.
This is still a kind of a brand new thing. And I think you're hinting, and I will get your comments too, Lee. This is, Atlanta putting itself literally and figuratively on not only the sports map and the pro sports map, but the sort of professional level city level, right? You mentioned Washington and the Redskins at the time, the then named Redskins. That was literally the South's quote unquote NFL team, and that's the way that George Preston Marshall wanted it for time in memoriam, right? So this is a big deal in Atlanta this time.
Correct. It really was, and it made the news all over North Carolina when we were there. So, it was in the news quite a bit that there was going to be the first real Southern franchise. And of course, then we got to be a part of it and be out there and work down in the bowels of it and be part of a lot of history at that place. And even though the Braves didn't have a lot of success over the years, there were some historic moments, that's for sure. But yeah, my perspective of it when it was being built was from out of state, and even up there it was big news. So I'm sure David here in the city, of course, when the buzz was going on at the stadium was going up, they're probably driving by on the interstate watching it go up, going, my goodness, look at that thing. Look at that. So it was an interesting time.
This is very true. I grew up in Atlanta, and before that, when I was really young, the only games we got were from the Redskins with Eddie LeBaron, that group of guys. And it'd be an occasional Sunday, but they built the stadium, and it followed that pattern of the stadiums that were built in the mid-'60s. It was Atlanta Stadium, St. Louis, and
Philadelphia. Yeah,
veterans, and they called them all ashtray stadiums. They had this looked like an ashtray, but anyway, they built the ballpark for the Braves, and the Falcons had to kind of figure out the way to put a football field in there. The viewing was not so good, but that's how it all started. And several years later, into the mid-'70s, they added Fulton County because they were paying taxes to the name of Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. And that's kind of the history behind that. But the people of Atlanta were all excited. We finally had a team in the South, and it was very exciting back then.
So how does the ground crew job thing come about? Was it the same for both of you, or were there different paths to come? And I'm guessing you didn't meet until that actually occurred.
Yeah. This is actually kind of one of those Twilight Zone moments.
Different paths.
Different paths, but different paths, but a very, very singular connection, believe it or not.
Yeah. He got in there earlier, and we're both South Fulton kind of guys. And in 74, a friend of mine that lived next door, and his nephew was from that Sylvan Hills High School group that Harvey knew. And one day I said, "Where are you guys going?" They go, "We're going down to the stadium and see if we can get ground crew jobs." And I said, "Can I go with you?" And they went, "Sure." So I jumped in the car and put in my application. I didn't hear anything for a little bit. This is 1974, the year Hank hit home run. So I got kind of antsy, and I called down to the stadium. I got Joe Shirley answered the phone, of all people, the director of stadium operation. I kind of told him, "God, I'm a huge Braves fan. I love to work on the ground crew." And then he hired me. So my first day on the ground crew was April the 8th, 1974, the night Hank broke Babe Ruth's record. It was all kind of, one of those things, on the timeline. And Harvey has already was on the ground crew a year before. And shortly thereafter, we became fast friends. And this friendship has grown to today.
Yep.
Where the two of us just love each other, and good stuff.
And Tim, I'll tell you a funny thing about it. So David rides over there with a guy named Greg Granger. He's taking he's driving his David's next door neighbor and David to the stadium. Well, Greg Granger is the guy who got me on the ground crew from school the year earlier. He would drive us to the ball game. So Greg was a friend of mine that we played basketball with. Little did I know, I didn't know he knew David's next door neighbor. So he's over there and they're visiting. And so it's funny that with the same guy that was one of my original 4 guys on the ground crew with me actually brought David to the stadium as well.
Mm-hmm. So what were you expecting from this kind of work environment?
Now, this is a funny one. Yeah, so I got hired as an usher, and I'm sitting out in center field, putting guys in seats and wiping their seats out and getting a quarter tip or whatever. And I can see all the way across the stadium into this big room under the seats. And I see the ground crew's always going in and out of there. They're driving stuff in and out of there. They're walking in and out of there. But you can also see this basketball. You can't see the hoop, but you can see people playing basketball. They're passing, dribbling, and running around. But the angle I had was such that you could not see the hoop. But I knew there was a basketball goal in there. So all four of us guys from Sylvan were big basketball guys, played at school and everything else. And so from what we ascertained, on downtime on the ground crew, you could play basketball. That's what the word we were hearing was. So we jumped at that opportunity to get into that environment. And of course, then that's what really, once you got in there and realized what was going on, you didn't want to leave it because you're out on the field, you're interacting with the players. Now, as far as what we expected, dirty, muddy, that kind of stuff when it rained, pulling the tarp. But that's all we had seen from our vantage point. We had no idea the kind of stuff they asked the ground crew to do behind the scenes. So we got into some stuff that we never envisioned, which was also part of the book. A lot of dirty jobs, as Mike Rowe, I guess, would say, and things that we were never trained for or never oriented about or anything. Just here, boys, take 8 of you and go up there and do this. And so a lot of that kind of stuff, that's kind of what I anticipated when I went into it. How about you, David? You didn't know either, did you? Just go in and see what they had to do, right?
I did not know. I just knew I got hired, and I knew the first day was this unbelievable situation where Kurt Gowdy and the NBC was coming in. We never seen anything like that before. And there was 55,000 fans waiting for Hank to break the home run. I just showed up to say, what do you all want me to do, And, I got there that afternoon, and a couple of hours later, I was told to get on this Cub Cadet with a tractor, go get some brick dust. So I jumped on it, and lo and behold, we're zipping through the tunnel, and Hank Aaron steps out of the clubhouse to take a break, and we almost take his knees out. And it didn't even hit me then, but later I thought, God, if we would have injured Hank. Here's NBC, 55,000 people, and I kept saying, when I get back, I'm so fired. I've been on the ground crew 2 hours and I'm gone. But it didn't happen because Hank was such a class guy. He never said anything about it. And then that night there was a light mist sprinkle going on. So they told the ground crew, go out there on first base side and get behind the tarp in position because we don't want any kind of rain delay. This game has got to be played. So I and Harvey and the rest of the guys are positioned behind the tarp. And I'm looking in and I see Hank hit that home run off Al Downing. And it still didn't sink in. I'm like jumping up and down. It was years later, I thought, God was part of this crazy history.
What was your job specifically focused on the baseball season and the Braves in particular, or did it also encompass the Falcons, the Chiefs, maybe even the Peach Bowl?
It was in the beginning much more for the Braves, and then when the Falcons started playing later, preseason games and all, they had a stadium authority group that took care of the field, and maybe one or two of us got hired to help out with that. As far as the Chiefs, the first time they came through, before I got there, they won the first championship in Atlanta, the only championship that we had.
At that point,
but they brought back the Chiefs in '79 for a few seasons, and I was involved with marking the soccer field because they employed the ground crew for the Braves to do all that. So I was involved with the Chiefs on their second go around.
Interesting. And that's obviously when Ted Turner owned it all, and those sort of very red, white, and blue, very memorable uniforms. While I've got you in that divot of soccer those years, that must have been kind of an adventure because number one, you had to put down lines and then somehow, if you will, I don't know, take them off if you can, in order to preserve some kind of sanctity of the baseball diamond. I got to think neither team was happy with the arrangement because they're two different sports in the same kind of, footprint.
Right. The Braves would be on a road trip, so we'd have to put the lines down for a soccer game, which is a lot of line marking. But they were done with chalk, and after the Chiefs played, we had to come out with Robert and Sam and wash them away. There was the spray-on lines. So I do remember so a soccer field is really long with a lot of penalty boxes and stuff like that. It was one of the more difficult line marking jobs of my career over baseball.
So give me a sense of sort of, I guess, what was a typical kind of day? And I'm guessing in many respects, you all had kind of free reign, perhaps, maybe even more so than you were, if you will, legally allowed to have. And perhaps you maybe took advantage of it too.
This is true. The rest of them will back this up, but the ground crew was always asked to do all the jobs. Braves, Chiefs, Falcons. We were always asked to do all this, and then we go into those promotions where the great Wallenda came into town, and he employed the ground crew to help him for that crazy walk across the stadium. And the promotions with the frisbees and the seat cushions, and the ground crew was always asked to help out without any question, help out. And then we had those concerts. Frazier will tell you about this, where they would just obliterate the field with this massive number of people, and it would take us a full week to try to clean it up and get ready for the Braves coming back from a trip on the West Coast or something. So we were kind of always like the guys that had to fix it, and we did for minimum wage.
Yeah. Yeah. And a typical day was, it varied. I mean, a normal typical day would be, about 7 or 8 of you mosey in about 8 in the morning and you take care of the field from the night before. A lot of nights now you had to cover the field if there was rain forecast overnight or something like that. But if it didn't, you just came in and you got the dugout straightened out from the night before. You filled in all the holes where the players had dug it out around home plate and on the mound and on the bullpen mounds, and those kind of things were done early in the morning. You'd run to sprinklers, and you didn't ever mow until afternoon. So you'd mow about twice a week and sweep the clippings up behind it, a couple of tractors to do that. So those were pretty typical days. And as far as baseball stuff went, afternoons, you'd put the equipment out for batting practice starting about 1:30, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, along through there. Now, of course, if rain was in the forecast, and we had typical Georgia summer days where it would rain and stop, and the sun would come out, rain and stop, and the sun would come out. Well, gosh, you're having to pull that tarp 4 or 5 times a day because you cannot leave the tarp out on the field when the sun comes out. It's going to burn the field. So, a typical day when it was cloudy and rainy like that, if you got lucky, it would start raining and rain all day, and then you'd only have to take it off one time. But just normal days were pretty mundane until boredom set in and other things set in. It made a group of 25 guys start looking for things to do.
Give me a sense of maybe you can describe for our audience a bit, those who are not familiar with it or remember it or grew up in the area. This was essentially a multi-purpose stadium, but I think fairly uniquely natural grass, right? Versus some of these other round donut-shaped ones, which perhaps came thereafter, which were completely all artificial turf.
Correct. I think being in the South had something to do with that. The others were up north, Cincinnati, Philly, those places. And so I'm sure being down south, we had the opportunity to grow that nice, thick Bermuda and really, keep it in great shape. So it didn't really start showing wear and tear until the end of the season, and then after 2 or 3 Falcons preseason games, and then by the end of the Falcons season, the middle of the field, like you'd see up north or somewhere else, was getting worn out and a little bit muddy. And then at the end of the season, they'd bring the motocross people in, dig the whole thing up, make a big giant motocross track out of it, and do that, level it down to the ground after that was done. And each year we'd start over and lay new sod again every March. So the field never really had a chance to settle, so to speak, or this sort of thing. But it was a remarkable field in great shape, considering the fact it got dug up every single season.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how that must have just put you all through the ringer, because I mean, you with 3 teams really kind of chewing up the field, right? I mean, that's something you can't regenerate. And then you sprinkle in a couple of major concerts. I don't know. You must have had no hair left by the time September rolled.
That was right. The first time I saw it happen, I said, "We'll never play baseball here again." After that first Allman Brothers concert, it's in. You'll read it in the book there, and the people listening to the show can. It was something we'd never seen, never thought we'd see in our life. You couldn't imagine the amount of garbage, just pure garbage. And the other things we found, of course, were incredible. The shards of glass from the wine bottles sticking up out of the outfield. You can just imagine.
You guys didn't put anything on top of the turf back in the day, right? This was all naked, if you will, to the grass and to the infield.
Yeah, his first experience. They called it festival seating. Bring what you want and sit. Bring your blanket and bring your. So here, beer bottles, glass. Didn't even make them bring cans or plastic. So it was a learning experience for them, and they figured a little bit of that out as he went forward. But it was wide open. Anything went. And as you'll see, I mean, the book will tell you there was so many different items that we found. You just can't even name them all. There's so much. And it'd make you want to pull your hair out, because you see this and you put all this work into getting it pristine like a golf course, and here it is destroyed by June. But it comes back eventually. It did come back, and we had to resod a few places out there occasionally, but by and large, it always held up, did its thing, and they got better at it. They got to where eventually they would lay plywood down when they were building the stage to have the forklifts drive on plywood highways, so the forklift tires would not cut ruts into the outfield. So they finally got smart and did some things like that to help. But it was any way they could do to make revenue, because in those days the Braves weren't, they were selling 7,000, 5,000 tickets a night. So they could make many hundreds of thousands of dollars by having one of these events rented out for the field. So.
Yes, Tim, and I remembered. When Falcon preseason started and a couple of games of the season, we had to do stuff like take the entire pitching mound down and remark the field, and part grass, part dirt. And you could imagine a football game would just tear up, the divots. But I tell you, the soccer games with the Chiefs, a soccer game, they really tore that field up. So it was a challenge every time. And this was led by a great boss, Robert Johnson, knew how to clean that stuff up and get it ready for the Braves coming back into town. I remember once, it was a Saturday night. The Falcons played a preseason game on a Saturday night, and the Braves were going to play a double header on Monday. And it was nonstop work to transfer the field with moving the pull-out stands back into place. And Robert really, with about 24 hours to get that field ready for a baseball game, and he would pull it off.
Yep.
So describe that. You're mentioning pull-out stands. I do have vivid memories of watching games of all 3 of those sports on television that you could see if to the naked eye, and if you were sort of a discerning viewer, you could sort of see that there were these stacks of. Give us a sense of like how the configuration, if you can, sort of looked for baseball and for football / soccer. In terms of like artificial stands sort of being moved in and out. I'm guessing these were on sort of rails, so to speak.
Right. In the beginning, pulling the extra seating for the football game was done by hand. A great guy that worked for the Falcons named Jim Hay would employ his guys and anybody on the ground crew for $10 an hour to stay up all night and get them set up. And it was a hand-built pullout. Later, they reconfigured it where it came out like they were stacked and pulled out a little bit better. But we were always under a 24, 36-hour window to get the thing switched and turn it into a football field. And, of course, you got the guys out there putting the lines out for an NFL game, pulling up the mounds. Part of the game is played on the dirt of the infield. The end zones were really nasty, where it wasn't a whole lot of room. You know, if you caught a touchdown, you didn't have much room before you're running into a brick wall.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Those seats, I remember those seats. They started at the left field. If you think of the baseball field, those pull-out seats started at the left field foul pole, went all the way around the outfield to the right field foul pole. And they would pull out just like bleachers used to in your old high school gym. You know, you'd push them all up against the wall there. So they just come straight out like that and, you know, get lower and then they'd go down in an accordion style sort of thing and look like an amphitheater sort of thing. And
but the Chiefs didn't use those during the summer in those late 70s games, right? That was only Falcons games.
I doubt if they needed them.
No.
Yeah, they didn't sell out.
That's my point.
Yeah.
You're being charitable when you say they didn't sell out. I remember watching those games on the old Superstation with Bob Neal calling the action. And actually, they were a little bit better than some of the away games, but it was, you know, they were thinly attended. Ironically, they were better attended indoors, but it's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Yep.
The whole thing with the putting the Chiefs the soccer field down was all about that incredible amount of line marking. It would take all day to do that. That was the biggest thing with them. They took the longest time to get that soccer field marked out so they could play that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that whole soccer thing happened with the Chiefs the first time around, and I don't think anybody really knew what to think about it. Nobody, they threw soccer at us in high school PE, and that's the first time we'd ever seen it or heard of it, you know. So it was all new to us in Georgia.
The Chiefs did win the city's first championship in '68. So when they came back in '69, they scheduled a game with Manchester of England.
Yeah, Manchester United, correct.
And 23,000 people showed up for that game, and I believe the Chiefs beat them. I believe.
Wasn't that guy's name, the coach they had, what was his name, Phil Woosnam or something like that?
Yes, he became the commissioner of the NASL.
Yeah.
He was the guy literally that saved the league, right? And
right.
I think in 1973 or it was just before then, the league kind of collapsed and was on life support in 1969, 1970, and he took it upon himself and literally moved the league offices into Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. So for a couple of years, he was, doing double, triple, quadruple duty, including being the league guy. Yeah.
He was player coach too, I think.
You got
it. There was on their second come around, at this point, Ted Turner had bought the Braves. So he put the money up for the Chiefs to come back in '79. And he was also connected with a guy in the Braves front office named Dick Cecil, who apparently had seen the FIFA games back in '66 and brought soccer to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
The second Turner come around, Turner put the money up. Dick Cecil ran it. And they had a 3-year run. Not a lot of success, but soccer,
I think Dick Cecil. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Soccer
in the South, was a new baby. It was all about football, basketball, and baseball.
Yep.
There was enthusiasm for soccer, and where we are today. It's very, very big.
Yep. So Dick Cecil's putting some sort of a filmography together about his time with the stadium, and probably got something to do with the Chiefs too. I heard somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised that doesn't come out soon.
Fantastic. Well, I'll follow up with you afterwards to get connected there, because that's definitely something we'd be hugely obsessive about. Well, you mentioned, though, Ted Turner. This is probably a good time to bring him up. He kind of sort of came into the mix and kind of took the Braves to the next level, and obviously was dabbling in all kinds of other, let's call them synergistic activities. The Chiefs being one of them, the Hawks certainly being one of them in the sports realm, but also this budding thing called a superstation, and sort of the advent of a local station in the realm of this new cable thing. Yep. What was any stories about Ted and the before and after, I guess, of being groundskeepers for some of the crown jewels in that stadium? And was he a taskmaster, or did he care, or did he have any involvement in? Do you have any, did you somehow almost knock out his kneecaps too while you were working on Hank Aaron?
He did. We did have some interactions with him, not many. He was not one to stay in one place long. I think David will tell you, he came up behind him once. He came in a couple of times into the ground crew room, but things certainly changed when he bought the team. There was his whole idea of doing what we had only seen before. We had seen WOR and I believe it was WGN. Those were the two channels for the Mets and the Cubs, wasn't it? We'd seen them, being broadcast all over the country, but those were giant cities up north to us. They could sell out anyway. But we never envisioned that showing all of Atlanta's games on a cable channel would be smart, or a UHF channel at that point, whatever it was, because they didn't draw fans anyway as it was. So everybody, all the people were going, all the experts said, "You're a nut. You'll never draw any fans if the games are on TV." And Ted said, "No, you're wrong. I'll draw more fans." Well, all of a sudden the parking lot started, over the next few years, you started seeing the parking lot, the license plates change a little bit. There was Alabama tags, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, all these people coming from all over the Southeast to see the Braves. And of course, the rest is history. Is what happened with TBS and CNN and all these other things that he did. But that's where it all started. He was before that, he was an advertising guy that sold billboards, and had them all over the Southeast. Turner was on every billboard you saw, just about. So he really exploded from that point, and he was a visionary. He saw things that other people scoffed at, but he saw money and profit and exposure in them. So, he changed everything, brought us into the limelight, and at that point, I think people started thinking bigger. So,
yeah, I mean, he arrived in '76. So I'm also curious, though. He strikes the sort of outside fan sort of as I'm gonna call him a meddler, right? But he certainly has opinions, and I got to think he probably strike me as somebody who might once in a while call up and say, "Hey, can you shave the mound down a little bit for the Dodgers coming into town," or some other quirk or advantage perhaps that could be gotten by the ground crew and the folks running the stadium.
Right. Now, and those things happen. We did it, of course. If a base stealer was coming into town, we might chew up around first base, make it soft so he couldn't get a good toe hold. I remember when Tony Gwynn used to come, he'd slap that ball down on the ground right in front of home plate and make it go real high that he could get to first base before they could even field it and throw him out. Well, we'd churn that all up, make it soft, where he couldn't do that, little things like that. But Turner, not so much. I don't think he knew enough. I don't think he knew enough about baseball to do any of that stuff. He was more of a guy who was like a second late on all that baseball stuff. He would just walk around and watch you and do things, and he would look at a job you were doing, and he'd make that old Turner sound. He'd go, all right, looking good, man. And then he'd just walk off.
Yeah. Ted was that kind of guy. One time I was finishing up the foul lines on the outfield where you're rebarking for the game, and all of a sudden I hear this voice behind me, and he goes, "All right, looking good." I turn around, it's Ted Turner. So he was a hands-on kind of guy.
Yeah.
That had no problem with touching base with every part of his dominion. And he was that kind of guy, but he was so forward-thinking. He was very forward-thinking. And in the beginning, he was trying to figure out, what star to bring into town. He did the Messerschmitt thing. He did the guy
Denny McClain. Yeah, Denny McClain.
Yeah,
Lynn Barker.
he's trying to figure out, can I sign this guy, get some people in the seats? But he also was all about those crazy promotions we talked about. He goes, well, let's do this, let's do that because it'll bring some people in the seats. Meanwhile, that TBS thing was growing. And after a few years, we get to the early 80s, we got Bob Horner, we got Del Murphy and Phil Necro in his prime, and we start being competitive. But this is all Ted Turner's drive behind this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, you're mentioning Andy Messersmith. I think if I have this correct, he Turner back in 76 or 77. I think he proposed the idea of replacing Messersmith's last name with the word channel because Messersmith's number was 17, which is the channel number for WTBS. That would have been hilarious to see channel 17 on the back of Andy Messersmith.
No, he did it. He did it.
Oh, he did it.
Oh, he did it.
He did it. And MLB came in there and said, you can't do that,
Yep.
MLB, so you can't do that. And Ted's like, well, I'm going to do what I do.
I can't imagine it lasted for long, but all right. But I do have to ask this though. I do remember this one in particular. Maybe you remember. Maybe it was a non-event. But back in '77, I think it was in May 11th, if I have it correct, May 11th, 1977. Captain Ted decided that for various reasons he was going to be the manager of the team.
Yeah.
So do you remember anything specifically about that, and maybe any other, shall we say, beyond normal idiosyncrasies from that game?
Yeah, definitely beyond normal. So Ted went into the dugout to manage the team, and MLB was like, you cannot do this. He didn't have a clue what he's doing, but it's typical Ted Turner where I'm going in there and I want to fix this and I want to win. I mean, really, that's what it was.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm sure the guy, whoever's number one assistant was, made every baseball move there was that night. But it was more of a stunt than anything.
Stunt, yes.
Yeah.
But you don't remember any shenanigans, him trying to maybe sort of do something to the field or that kind of stuff.
Personally, I don't. I think Ted was lost.
That sounds about right.
He was lost, but it was a stunt, and it was the last effort by him. And but the next day, Ted Turner had another plan. He always had another plan that led to our success. He got Joe Torre in here.
Yep.
And then down the road, the great Bobby Cox. So the guy is smart enough, in that arena to pull off what is successful. And then the Braves went on that incredible run after that,
Yeah, he kind of knew how to wade into stuff and look at it. He was damn sure going to go in there and look at it and see, well, maybe I can figure it out from inside out. How hard can this be? I mean, that's kind of the attitude I think he had. How hard can this managing thing be? And well, he didn't know what he was, like I say, he didn't know what he was doing as far as running a baseball game went, but he loved it. He wanted to be part of the team. He wanted to be a winner more than anything. Just as America's Cup record and all those other things he was involved in, he's always been a winner. So I think it bugged him more than anything else that he could not come in and just fix it immediately. Like basketball, you might buy one or two, three guys and get close. Baseball's a little different animal. And so I think that disappointed him, but he never stopped trying. But he never meddled to the point to where he would tell the managers or the coaches what to do. He would just tell them, you need this player, that player. Let's bring this guy in. I'll buy him if you want him. And that kind of stuff. And
I'll give you air cover by marketing the hell out of it and calling it America's team and all its grandiosity.
Exactly. And damn doggone if it didn't become America's team. I moved to Hawaii in 1979 for 3 years. Got over there and couldn't believe it. The number one team that everybody wanted to talk about when I got there was the Atlanta Braves, not the LA Dodgers, not the Giants from the West Coast, not the Padres, but the Atlanta Braves because of Channel 17. So it was the most amazing thing I had to say. That opened my eyes really to what he had done when I got there and saw that.
Tell me about the stadium itself, right? Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium, the full name of it in its later years. What kind of describe maybe to our audience, perhaps, were there any either obvious or maybe not so obvious quirks, swirling winds? I know that for a long time it was oddly situated in baseball's stadium pantheon as being actually, until the Colorado Rockies came into be, one of the higher elevation stadiums, which to the point was called the launching pad, which is actually a pretty interesting tidbit that I never even would have thought of. What of that? The composition of the soil and the ground. What quirks and issues would you say you and the players or others maybe didn't know, or the quirks of it all?
I would say it was a hitter-friendly ballpark,
and not because of short fences. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Atlanta is 1,000 feet above sea level, and except for your all the teams that play on the coast, Dodgers, 49ers, New York. Next to Denver, we were the highest elevation, and then you get that summer sun and the humidity, and balls were flying out of the park. Visiting teams love to come to Atlanta. It helped Atlanta hitters. The balls would fly out of that park like nobody's business.
Yep. It was an interesting ballpark. I remember reading about it in a magazine once, and they described, I think it was Life magazine, could have been Sports Illustrated, but they described it as a circular rush job thrown up in 18 months is how they described it. And I would say that's true. They were all in the bowels of the stadium. There were these big areas of just dark, gloomy dirt. We even found the ground crew. We were digging around back there and found these, I guess there was 75 or 100 of these 55-gallon drums, all full of K rations and some kind of survivalist stuff in case there was a nuclear war stacked up under there. I guess they had it back under there in case the people come to the stadium after a nuclear war or something. I don't know what it was, but it was all these Army green barrels. So there's all this stuff down in the catacombs, and up on the top, there was a catwalk, I remember, going around the entire stadium, just about as wide as your 2 feet, little old handrail. You had to go around that whole thing to put the flags up for the visiting teams or for every team in the league, whether it was baseball or football. So all of these little things that were hidden in there that you didn't know about, little hideaway places, there were thousands of them. And but to the general fan, you don't see any of that. You just walk in through the gates, you walk up the ramp, and wow, bright lights and a beautiful field. But as with all things, down in the pits, there's some pretty cobwebby places, I'll say.
How would you describe the seating, the lighting, and the scoreboard? If I remember correctly, a lot of fairly advanced for its time. Lots of message board type stuff, early days.
Yeah, that's funny. The stadium, they were light bulbs. They were literally real light bulbs. Just
I can't imagine you had to replace a few of them.
That did, and we didn't have to do that. Thank goodness. That was the stadium authority. They had electricians, plumbers, the whole batch. So they would be out there all day, changing light bulbs. Because now it's done much differently with LED lighting and everything. But that back then they had a bank of light bulbs in that room back there. There must have been thousands of them that they would keep on hand, and spent 2 or 3 hours every day just changing lights on that big giant scoreboard. And that evolved over the years, of course, to enhance the stadium. They would, the jumbotrons and all those kind of things kept coming. But that was a big one, the first one we had.
When did you guys know that the stadium's days were kind of numbered? I mean, you mentioned the fact that, I think the stadium was actually built officially in a year. I mean, not much more than a year. Yep. I'm sure it took another 6 months or so to put all the finishing touches on it and stuff. But by the early 90s, obviously things were vastly changing. And obviously the Olympics were coming into play in 96, right? So lots of sort of different sort of changes and stuff. But I mean, was it harder in those later years to keep the place going, or was it still somewhat, pristine because of all the work that you had done over the years? I mean, how much wear and tear would you say sort of it had gone through? I'm sure the surroundings, yes, but what about the field and the surface and stuff?
I think the field was excellent because the Braves now are winning the division every year in the 90s. The Falcons had moved over to the Georgia Dome, so it was a pure baseball stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And for sight lines and vision, it was made for baseball, not for football. So it was good, but the Braves were ready to move on, and they built Turner Field just a couple of blocks away. It was just all in the making, but for a baseball field, there were no complaints.
Nope. Mm-mm. And I'll say that too. I'll back that up and say that, the stadium probably did not need to be replaced, but it was at a time when all of a sudden that was the kosher thing to do, whether it was football or baseball. These owners were getting hundreds of millions of dollars of tax relief to do it and making off of, they're making a ton of money now off of marketing and everything else with a new stadium. So there, you get a chance to upgrade and also make a few $100 million at the time. So that pushed it over the top. So, doing Turner Field, what used to be another parking lot for Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium, is exactly where they built it, just across the street. And so I think it was partially the fact that it was the kosher thing or the cool thing to do at that time. Probably not necessary because it was finally doing what it was built to do, just house the Braves, and it looked great. So,
yeah, that's ironic, right? Because indeed, once you can just fully focus on one sport without having to do all the changeovers and stuff, you can kind of really, maybe do some semi-permanent things without having to worry about, bleachers being pulled over on top or pulling up lines and that kind of stuff. Maybe to put a wrapper on this. It's been, I don't know, has it been 25, almost 30 years now since the stadium went on to, shall we say, greener pastures. What do you guys miss from your years working the stadium? And is it nostalgia or perhaps maybe, something that's missing now with all the modern things like Truist Field and that kind of stuff? Like, how much of it is great memories and how much of it is, gee, maybe we should go back to some of these kinds of things?
I really think it's nostalgia with any ballpark, any field, NFL, baseball, whatever. You just kind of miss it.
Yeah, and there's something about the big leagues. I think David and me used to always say too, Tim, when you're out there at night under those lights, day after day, night after night, month after month, and it gets in your blood. It's a camaraderie between 25 guys. I guess it's like a team, like the team does, and when you're together all the time and you're building these relationships and stuff, and it becomes part of you. You become part of the show becomes part of you. And I think like when a player leaves, when he retires, he has that spot it's missing. Well, I think we all had it a little bit when we finally got real jobs and got married and had to stay home at night and couldn't be out there till 11 o'clock, and those kind of things that life just happens. And so I think that's probably what we miss the most. A little bit of the action here and there, the bright lights, the crowds, and then the nostalgia part of knowing what's happened in that ballpark.
I have to ask if any of you have any, shall we call them, special souvenirs. Did you keep anything from your days? Some of the grass or the dirt. Maybe you stole a base, literally.
a lot of stuff. Got bats from players. A lot of balls. Chips there used to be a golf cart that we drove relief pitchers out on. It had a Braves hat.
Yes, I was going to just about to ask about that.
Yeah,
whatever happened to that?
Well, it's still there were two bats that were used to prop the hat up as part of like a frame, part of the frame. Two Hank Aaron bats. Well, Chip Moore, who's of course went on to become CFO of the Braves and all, who's in our book with us, he got those two bats when he was still there when that thing finally went away, and he's got those two bats at his house, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. He got them as part of several things they were all given away at the time. But a lot of that stuff got taken out. Some seats, some people got a seat, some things like that when they went back when it was torn down, that kind of stuff. But I've got some old flags that were NFL flags for I think I've got the Chicago Bears and somebody else, but those were ones they were throwing away to replace with the new ones, that kind of stuff. And but we all had pieces of turf we took home when after we'd finished sodding the field. There would always be these big chunks left over. So for years, my brother and me had about a 10 by 10 square in the backyard that was Braves turf that we would play wiffle ball. That's where you'd stand to pitch, was on that Braves turf.
Yeah, I guess I remember. I had a couple of things. I also got some turf from the 80s that is in my front yard of my house. It still comes back every year. And the other thing was in 1974, after Hank broke the Babe Ruth record, every home run was going to be the next one. And it's in the book. And he hit a walk-off homer against the Phillies in May of 74 for 722. And I got my hands on that ball because it was sitting in dead center field in the mud. And I raced out there to get it. And the people up in the stands were waving money and screaming at me to give them the ball. But I was running back to the ground crew room with the thought of, I'm going to switch it out with one of those batting practice balls. And then, when I'm old and down the road, I would say I have Hank's 722, except the guy, the director of stadium operation, intercepted me, and I didn't ball. But I was trying to get that ball, and those are my fondest memories. And it's in the book. You can read about it.
Yep. Some of the great memories are, of course, working concerts. I mean, sitting on stage 10 feet from B.B. King, driving Elton John out. Got one of our buddies drives Elton John out in that very golf cart we just talked about. In the dressing room with Aerosmith and Kiss and all these different bands over the years, and really catering to their personal need, things they wanted, getting to know them a little bit, stuff like that. Just incredible opportunity that, little old country boy like me never really expected to do when we moved to Atlanta. But it turned out to be a very, very fortuitous turn of events.
Yes, and also our interaction with the great James Brown.
Oh, yes.
So there was a period of time where Ted Turner would bring James Brown for a post-game celebration, and we would drive him out there on the cart, and he was looking like James Brown, and I would be so close to him, and I was so a fan of James Brown. Those are the kind of the unreal moments that I remember.
So here we are, Tim, driving James Brown out with a farm on Alice Chalmers' farm tractor, hooked up to a flatbed trailer that we had to sweep the brick dust off of before he could get up on it. So that's how prepared he comes driving up in the limo. Gets out, says, "Hey, we got to take him out on the field." On what? On that big tractor, on that big trailer. So just James Brown, the godfather of soul, coming out on a farm tractor with a big flatbed trailer and us driving. It's this kind of stuff you just can't make up.
All right, 2 last questions, guys. Then I'll let you go. I appreciate this is really cool stuff, and I'm not even from Atlanta, but so have you ever found yourselves going back to the original site? I understand now it's essentially a parking lot for I don't think it's called Turner Field anymore, but I know it's been reconverted, if you will. The successor stadium was now converted into, I guess, a full-time college football stadium. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But the parking lot though is where the footprint of the old Fulton County was, right?
Right. There's still a placard there for the home run, and David lives just a couple of miles from there, so he's seen that whole thing. Georgia State has now taken over Turner Field for their athletic program, pretty much.
But neither of you find yourselves ever in that parking lot, kind of reminiscing at all.
I'm in Florida now, but when I go through Atlanta several times a year. I drive right past it, so I'm within 200 yards of it, and I can see it as plain as day. So I think of it. Now, David, I don't know if David actually went over there recently and took a couple of pictures for our book. So he's been there more recently than the rest of us, certainly. But
I do go back there. It's 4 miles away. I go over there and I just stand there and I think about Hank and Dusty Baker and Dale Murphy. And then I think about Tommy Novus and Claude Humphrey and those Falcon games, and I get chills.
Yeah.
It's there's a street over there. It's in the book. It's called Crew Street. Crew Street. You know, we were called our crew. And I recently pulled up history on it. That street's been there since before the 1900s.
Evidently.
The ground crew used to kid that they named the street after us, but it goes back to before the 1900s.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of lovely history, and I get over there and I get chill bumps. Just great. You know, they won the World Series there before they left. Some great Falcon games, and it's a part of me, a part of my growing up that I will never forget.
Good deal. And of course, remember the only reason they won that one World Series was because the baseball gods allowed them to beat the curse that day.
Well, let me ask you one last question, and we've sort of asked this of some other folks too, not directly related to the Atlanta Braves story, but we all know now the Truist Field, or Truist Park, excuse me, now is up and running and relatively successful. But it's definitely away from the city center. It's in suburban Cobb County, and it's nestled within, I believe, a footprint that it's owned by the Braves organization, kind of an office park sort of scenario, and real estate development around. It's almost like its own sort of, I don't know, specific, I wouldn't call it sort of a development, but dare I say it's a little soulless, and number one, because it's not near the city center. Number two, it's kind of sort of office park-ish, although well done. How do you guys feel about that, given all those memories you just talked about?
Well, I
would have to say that it's the world we live in today. You know, it's the corporate world we live in today. Chip will back this up. You know, the ground crew doesn't have the personal connection with the ball players that we knew. And it's probably a reality to it. They make a lot of money and security and all that.
But you know, Tim, that was the last 60 acres in the city of Atlanta. It was a city of Atlanta zip code. That's right next to Marietta. It was the last 60-acre tract big enough to do what they wanted to do. Nowhere else would have worked. And a Twilight Zone little fact about this is, you know, you've seen the book now, you know that Chip Moore and Clay Jackson are our other two people who told stories to Austin. And so this whole thing happens. The Braves, nobody knows it's going to happen. I mean, it's a big bombshell when it's announced one morning. So they negotiate, they buy this real estate. It turns out that the guy helping them negotiate for the real estate is Clay Jackson's brother. And he couldn't even tell Clay about it. So all this time we're thinking, you know, we're telling these stories about the book and we're doing this stuff, thinking about writing a book, and the Braves are happily going along in Turner Field. And all of a sudden one morning the word comes out that they've moved, and we come to find out that whole deal was negotiated and set up by one of our 4 ground crew guys, by his brother. And he kept it secret from him the whole time, non-disclosures and all of that. So very small world, kind of a Rod Serling moment there when we all found that out.
Well, at least there's some continuity there, right? And you know,
absolutely.
As the Braves move on, I mean, and you know, look, continuity. You know, this is a franchise that began at the turn of the last century in Boston, of all places, right? And it's had a couple of locations all along the way, right? So there's a long history there beyond just even the last, you know, number of decades in Atlanta realm. But look, there's make no mistake. I mean, the Braves and the Falcons and the various iterations of the Chiefs, and let's not forget about the Peach Bowl, the original home of the Peach Bowl. All of those things got their start in Atlanta, in that stadium known as Atlanta-Fulton County Stadium. And you guys were in the midst of all of it. So, you know, in many respects, you are exceedingly fortunate to have, you know, I'm sure it's a young kid's dream to kind of maybe have some of those kinds of memories and in that kind of environment. And it's kind of, you know, once in a lifetime to see all those things all those people, all those kinds of memories and stuff. And I think it's fantastic that you guys figured out a way to at least collate some of those stories in there. And maybe there's a documentary in there somewhere too, if you're still at it.
Yep. Well, we've been told there might be, so we're all available for whatever comes. We're just glad the stories got told and that people got to hear about some of those crazy times that even in a ballpark in Atlanta where the teams didn't always win, a lot of history happened and a lot of remarkable things. So pretty good stuff.
All right, fun times for sure down in Atlanta way. Obviously, many stadia and sporting events and all kinds of stuff have occurred since, but there's no mistaking the fact that Fulton County Stadium was instrumental in elevating Atlanta into sports mecca-dom for sure. Our thanks to Lee Frazier, Dave Fisher, the author, and as told to guy Austin Gisriel. We appreciate them being on the show. And again, the two other guys that were part of the composition of this book, Clay Jackson and Chip Moore. And the book, again, is called Ground Crew Confidential. It is available wherever fine books are found. And of course, you can give us a few shekels of referral love by going to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just searching up this episode number. Geez, what number is it already? 286. Okay. And there will be a convenient link there to Amazon where you can get it for probably the best price and probably the quickest amount of time to get it in your hot little hands. You can also get the Kindle version too instantly. And we appreciate your giving a consideration to that, and you're going to love the book. It's just a trove of story and anecdote after story and anecdote. Let's see. Austin also has his own website with his featuring his own additional books and writings and stuff, and that is at his website is austingisriel.com. That's AUSTIN. Gisriel is GISRIEL. austingisriel.com. Like I said before, our website is goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where every single stinking episode that we've ever done and will do will reside, and is the easiest and most convenient form. But of course, if you haven't subscribed or followed us or whatever you do to ensure that you get every latest episode on our assemblage of episodes in your favorite podcast player / feed, or whatever that is, whatever device, whatever mechanism you use, make sure you're following us, subscribing to us so you get every episode the second they come out. You don't want to be behind the times or behind the scenes. You want to be the first in your neighborhood, of course, to hear all the great stuff that we're throwing your way. But that website is a good backup in case something goes awry or you want to tip somebody off to it for the first time and get them a little sampler platter, if you will. Our email address is hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Always welcome your virtual cards and letters. Thank you so much. And of course, on social media for the forever how long we're going to continue to do these things on social media. It is a topsy-turvy time for sure, but we're just going to use it at least to promote the episodes and until we find a better platform or platforms to get those messages out. They will remain, perhaps with noses held, on Twitter at goodseatsstill, on Facebook at goodseatsstillavailable, and on Instagram at goodseatsstillavailable. Our thanks to the great Jerry Payne in, believe it or not, metropolitan Atlanta. Hopefully he was patiently listening and enjoying the proceedings this week, and hopefully you did too. More to come, lots of good stuff coming through the holidays and beyond. And now in our new studio, hopefully a little bit more productive and even, God forbid, a little higher quality. So let's keep our fingers crossed for that. And until next week, we'll see you. And we thank you, of course, for listening. Take care. Bye.